Welcome back to the Equally Yoked Show. Tariffs are all over the news. How are tariffs affecting the market? And will they begin to tank? Or will they surge? This is the Equally Yoked Show. Welcome back. If you missed the news on tariffs this week, lucky for you, I have been tracking this and gathered all the items to look over and compile a complete briefing on the matter. I've looked diligently on these things. I've listened to so much podcasts. I've done some research and compiled this evidence on everything that has been happening so that I can bring this to you, present it to you, and you can gather your thoughts and ideas and all of this that's happening with regards to tariffs. So let's start what we've heard. Trump announced Liberation Day, announcing sweeping tariffs, including a 10% baseline tax on all U.S. imports and higher reciprocal tariffs on countries with significant trade surpluses like China, which is 34%, and European Union at 20%. He claimed these measures would revive American industry, reduce reliance on foreign goods, and address a $1.2 trillion trade deficit, framing it as a national emergency, which it is. Now, this is something that is not out of the blue. He has most certainly talked about this during his campaign, that he wanted to bring all these things and implement them during his administration. Now, we saw from the beginning of his administration that everything that he's been doing, every step of the way, he has been fulfilling promise after promise after promise after promise with executive order after executive order after executive order. Trump is a boss man. He really is. Now, since then, since the tariffs, markets began to tank, but not for long. Just a couple hours later, just a day later, we see that countries from all over the world wanted to come to the table with America to bring or to begin market trade deals. Since China has not backed down, this is a recent statement from the Chinese Communist Party with regards to the retaliatory tariffs from the U.S. I think it's very, very important.
China is not backing down. Its Commerce Ministry warning that, quote, the U.S. threat to escalate tariffs on China is a mistake on top of a mistake and once again exposes the blackmailing nature of the U.S. China will never accept this. If the U.S. insists on its own way, China will fight to the end.
As you have heard it there, China will fight to the very end. Of course they will. They'll try. They will try, but they will die a morbid death trying to do this because this is a very dangerous game that they're playing here. They are playing a game where they have essentially, they have a little bit of leverage, okay? I think that's important to say. They have a little bit of leverage. The U.S. is the number one consumer economy. And they need us more than we need them. They need us more than we need them. Absolutely. And so Trump is utilizing his cards to start this sort of back and forth with China. They've began adding tariffs and still have not backed down. But legacy media has began to create a narrative stating that Trump's move on these tariffs are a bad idea. Well, let's see what they have to say.
This president won the election based on reducing costs, but he's enacted the largest tax increase we've seen in over 50 years. And you know who's going to pay the price? Americans shopping at Walmart, Americans shopping at Costco. We don't know the purpose of these tariffs. The only thing we do know is he's planning on taking tax revenue from Americans paying more at Walmart and Costco and putting that into tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans.
So this guy says that we don't know what the purpose of these tariffs are. But indeed, we do, because the administration has been very transparent, completely transparent, on why these tariffs are back in the playing field. But not only does this guy mention that Americans, he mentions that the Americans are going to have to pay the price because of Walmart and Costco, right? Having most of their imports from China, if not all of their imports from China. And so Walmart, thus far, has the leverage and power to negotiate with China on price changes based on product categories rather than by country of origin. So Walmart is telling China to pay for these tariffs. China's move to slap on retaliatory tariffs back on America is not working. The world is turning away from China and turning to the U.S. to make a deal with the U.S. because the last to come to the table is going to get the worst end of the stick. But CNN is full of nonsense. So let's hear the Secretary of Treasury, Scott Bessent, talking on the goal of these tariffs. He breaks it down in a way that is easy for us to understand. Let's hear him out.
President Trump, as you know, is better than anyone at giving himself maximum leverage. So what he's done is we outlined the tariffs on April 2nd and then gave the countries several days to think about it. As I advised on many shows on April 2nd, I suggested that the foreign officials keep your cool, they do not escalate, and come to us with your offers on how you're going to drop tariffs, how you're going to drop non-tariff barriers, how you're going to stop your currency manipulation, how you're going to stop the subsidized financing. And at a point, President Trump will be ready to negotiate.
So they're using these tariffs. Like CNN was mentioning, we don't know what the purpose of these tariffs are. But here we see the administration, they're talking about the fact that Trump is using his cards to gain leverage. So let's see what has happened with the fact that he's using his leverage. Like I mentioned, the countries that have gone and contacted the U.S. to make deals. Like I said, this is all so important.
Did Japan put an offer on the table? I mean, some places have said we'll put zero tariffs. We've heard that. I mean, actually, whether you buy it or not, the European Union, von der Leyen said that they would go 0 and 0. Does Japan put an offer on the table yet?
I haven't seen anything from them, but Larry, I can tell you that there are 50, 60, maybe almost 70 countries now who have approached us. So it's going to be a busy April, May, maybe into June. And Japan is a very important military ally. They're a very important economic ally. And the U.S. has a lot of history with them. So I would expect that Japan's going to get priority just because they came forward very quickly, but it's going to be very busy. And President Trump, again, gave himself maximum negotiating leverage. And just when he achieved the maximum leverage, he's willing to start talking.
So I think this is all so very important because when we talk about reciprocal tariffs, if you tax my exports, I'll tax yours in return. Trump is a businessman. He's thinking through these things in the long term, right? We as Americans need to get on board with the fact that we need to think about the idea of delayed gratification, that although we'll be sort of temporarily hurt in the moment, but later we'll see the benefit of all these things that are now being manifested. Stocks have already risen. the S&P 500, NASDAQ. These stocks have shot back up because a lot of people, financial advisors, I'm not a financial advisor, but they were saying, look, don't freak out because you're seeing the market sort of go down. When you see things like the policies being made on tariffs and other policies, you will generally see a sort of downtrend in the market before it starts to trend upward. Let's see where we're at within the next year or so. But I think that we're probably going to be in a better position because Trump utilizing his cards correctly. And we'll find out when we get to that point if what he did was actually wise. So what exactly has a globalist economy gotten us here in America? Something that Scott Bessent has mentioned. You can watch the full interview, but he talks about this sort of globalist economy is that's what it really is, right? This is from the last administration implementing these globalist economic policies. So J.D. Vance encourages us, or no, rather educates us, looking back just a couple days ago on Liberation Day, Vice President J.D. explains why a globalist economy doesn't work. This is the same way FDR, Bill Clinton, George Bush, along with others, have pursued these types of policies, leaning towards a tariff-free economy. So this is what he goes on to say.
Fundamentally, it's based on two principles: incurring a huge amount of debt to buy things that other countries make for us. And to make it a little bit more crystal clear, we borrow money from Chinese peasants to buy the things those Chinese peasants manufacture. That is not a recipe for economic prosperity. It's not a recipe for low prices, and it's not a recipe for good jobs in the United States of America. For 40 years, we have gone down that pathway. We've seen closing factories. We've seen rising inflation. We've seen the cost of housing so high that most Americans can't afford to buy a home right now. President Trump is taking this economy in a different direction. He ran on that, he promised it, and now he's delivering. And yes, this is a big change. I'm not going to shy away from it, but we needed a big change, Lawrence. We cannot keep going down the Joe Biden globalist pathway where we have $2 trillion of peacetime debt and deficits. We have manufacturing disappearing. That is not working for Americans. We've got to take this country in a different direction.
So, good point that he makes there. I just want to mention, because of the fact that we talked about countries that have come back or come to the table, with Japan being one of the first, Taiwan offers zero tariffs and more investments in the U.S. So on Sunday, this is 22 hours ago, they proposed zero tariffs, lower trade barriers, and more investments in the United States instead of retaliating against President Donald Trump's tariff increases. I wonder if they're making the smart move here, which I think they are, because China is doing these retaliatory tariffs. They slapped on the U.S. 104%. We'll see where we go from there, but we'll get into a clip of Kevin O'Leary, who talks about a huge tariff increase that he thinks should happen. Let's look at the other countries that have also wanting to come to the table. EU offers Trump 0 for 0 tariffs on industrial goods with the United States. President Ursula said on Monday that the bloc has offered a 0 for 0 tariff trade arrangement on industrial goods with the United States in a bid to avoid a full-on trade war. While the EU chief continued to condemn the reciprocal tariff measures enacted by U.S. President Donald Trump to rectify the long-standing transatlantic imbalance as pressure from the markets began to take shape. And it says von der Leyen and other top Eurocrats expressed willingness to negotiate with the White House. Also, Vietnam pledges to buy more U.S. goods as it seeks urgent Trump tariff talks. The South Asian manufacturing giant counts the U.S. as its single biggest export market in the first 3 months of the year, but its key customer has now hit it with a colossal 46% duties, AFP reports. All these reports are very interesting. So Kevin O'Leary talks about these 400%. Well, I get there. I don't want to jump the gun just yet. But let's hear what Kevin O'Leary has to say with regards to China and their terrible actions.
104% tariffs on China are not enough. I'm advocating 400%. I do business in China. They don't play by the rules. They've been in the WTO for decades. They have never abided by any of the rules they agreed to when they came in for decades. They cheat, they steal IP. I can't litigate in their courts. They take product, technology, they steal it, they manufacture it, and sell it back here. Never has an administration.
400% tariffs? What would that
I
look
want
like?
Xi on an airplane to Washington to level the playing field. It's just not about tariffs anymore. Nobody has taken on China yet, not the Europeans, no administration for decades. As someone who actually does business there, I've had enough. I speak for millions of Americans who have IP that have been stolen by the Chinese. I have nothing against the Chinese people. They brought great literacy, art, and tech to the world. The government cheats and steals, and finally, an administration, you may not like Trump, you may not like his style or his rhetoric, finally, an administration that puts up and says enough.
Yeah. I mean, he's absolutely right. An administration that finally says enough is enough. We're not going to have it. And that's right. We're not going to have it. We're not going to stay in this sort of nonsense of not being able to afford our own homes, not being able to make a decent living in our own country. Now, these tariffs are to, in fact, help us with bettering our economy, which I agree will eventually happen. But we need to, again, talk about the delayed gratification, because we can't just look at the instant gratification as to what the, last administration was doing with their 4 years in power. That's absolutely terrible. Now I'm going to read a comment here from the YouTube comment section. It says, I hired a guy from China and he stole all my CAD programs and bailed back to Hong Kong. Yeah. Actually, this is breaking news story. Let me mention to you that China actually came out in a secret meeting. This was actually not something that was public. Now, this has been brought to the public by the, I think, Washington Post, or forget, one of those news outlets. And they actually talked about the fact that during the secure meeting, they met with the Biden administration. They talked about the cyber attacks, the things that were happening. And they actually admitted to the fact that they were the ones behind some of the cyber attacks with regards to the U.S. infrastructure that was attacked during that their 4 years in power, the Biden administration. Now, we saw attacks on AT&T and big and other major carriers. Turns out that it was as a result of the Chinese Communist Party meddling with the U.S. and really causing what's the word I'm looking for? Serious danger, not only to what you would do is an attack to the military personnel of the United States. They actually were attacking civilian infrastructure. That kind of stuff can cause wars. And this wasn't supposed to be public. This was supposed to be private, but they had released this information. Absolutely crazy. This is who we're dealing with, folks. We're dealing with people from the Chinese Communist Party, Xi Jinping, and his cabinet administration, whatever you want to call them. They are thieves, liars, stealers. Now, Trump says that he has a great relationship with Xi Jinping. I'm sure that's the case. I'm sure they will come to the table. I'm sure they will talk about things that they want to accomplish with regards to these tariffs. I'm sure of it. When will that happen? I mean, we don't really know exactly. But as I mentioned, that China did add the 104% U.S. tariffs. Now, the U.S., during this back and forth with tariffs, the U.S. is beginning to reacquire the Panama Canal because it was gifted, right? And the Panama Canal is a critical artery for global trade, handling about 6% of the world's maritime commerce. And the canal faces significant complications with geopolitical tensions. With China having significant influence over port operations, the U.S. seeks to regain control of the canal to allow trade once again. This all ties into this whole tariff thing with the U.S. and China. Well, China's trying to deal with, the tariff situation. Trump says, hey, we're going to pull another move and we're going to actually go and reacquire control over the Panama Canal. So the U.S. seeks to regain control of the canal to allow trade once again. The area has been volatile due to the Yemen Houthis and Yemenis pirates attacking ships that trade through this route. There's been plenty of videos that you can see online with the ongoing conflict of U.S. ships and Yemeni Houthis, where they're shooting rockets at the ships, and the U.S., of course, combating them. So during this whole debacle, U.S.-China tariffs, Pete Hegseth gives us an update on the canal to lock in on this terrain. Let's see what our Defense Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, says with regards to this Panama Canal.
This is about malign Chinese influence. This is a power play by the Chinese in our backyard on what in the military we call key terrain. The Panama Canal is strategic key terrain. You mentioned the 40% are U.S. ships. Well, 75% of the traffic that goes through the Panama Canal either originates from or is going to a U.S. port. And you mentioned the history there of our investment. This is something we've been involved in for quite some time. And so we had a chance to go down there with a large group of U.S. soldiers and ships and others to meet with their leadership and say, we want to help you remove Chinese influence. And thankfully, the leadership of Panama are eagerly pro-American, and they've demonstrated already. They kicked out the Belt and Road Initiative when Secretary of State Rubio was there a few months ago. They did an audit on the control of those Chinese ports, which unsurprisingly, had huge fraud inside them, and that's been exposed. And so those are up for sale and likely going to BlackRock, which again would take away more Chinese influence. And we arrived with a simple message: is we want to be your partner in securing this strategic piece of key terrain.
Pete Hegseth is most certainly on the forefront on this stuff to be able to help the U.S. regain this territory area. Because again, like I said, it was gifted to these people here. And China sought to heavily influence that area to avoid, or rather to control it and not allow free trade. And it became this whole sort of thing. Now, Iran, of course, is the one that is supplying the Yemeni Houthis in order to attack America. And it's not like they have even a choice in the matter, apparently. And so I wanted to take a look at a clip from Charlie Kirk. He goes on a little bit more detail with regards to these tariffs. And let me just get this video queued up for you. But I think it's important to look at everything in its totality to really understand what's happening with these tariffs. They're not a bad thing for the American economy. They're most certainly not a bad thing. I think that we're heading into a very good thing with America utilizing its leverage to, negotiate with these countries. And so let's see what Charlie Kirk has to say on this matter, because I think it's going to be very, very interesting.
Different chats open of different responses from foreign nations regarding tariff threats, regarding reciprocity. So there is a lot going on here, but instead of going into all the details, because that's just going to change by every 5 minutes, I think we need to take a step back and reset the foundational framework, to reset a 30,000-foot view of exactly what's going on here. President Donald Trump has been railing against bad trade deals for the last 30 or 40 years. President Donald Trump, as a businessman, identified trade deficits. And the way trade is supposed to be constituted is we do what we do best and you do what you do best, and we will barter. By doing so, you will make us wealthier and we will trade and we will both be able to have a flourishing future. What ended up happening in the 1990s and early 2000s, in the 1990s, there were three critical mistakes made by Bill Clinton: the entrance of China into the World Trade Organization, the NAFTA, and also the repeal of the idea of investment bank and commercial banks. That's a whole separate issue for another time, but the conflation of investment and commercial banks allowed the cheap flow of money to go into the capital markets in a way that specific deregulation, I think, actually led us to the 2008 financial crisis and the lords of easy money leading us closer and closer to fiscal and financial apocalypse. Now, free trade did make the stock market go up. Nobody is doubting that. Unlimited, unfettered free trade did make the 10% do very well. I am part of the 10%. I can say this as somebody who is part of the evil 10% of the country. When you are on the upper part of the socioeconomic ladder, specifically, if you do work that does not involve your hands, but only involves your brain, that does not involve your body, but only involves your brain, free trade is traditionally a great idea because we became an information economy and a consumer economy and not an industrial one. We thought because we were entering into a technological revolution, because that we were entering into a brave new world of unfettered, unapologetic free trade, that we would no longer need to make stuff. In fact, that is what the third world does. The idea was that the third world will make our products for us and that we will be able to become wealthier. Francis Fukuyama famously wrote a book called The End of History. The assumption was permanent U.S. dominance. It was a post-Cold War mentality. It was that neoliberalism is the end of history. Fukuyama wrote in The End of History that this will be the end of war, that neoliberalism was the apex of civilization. Neoliberalism was, of course, invade the world, invite the world. The idea of the Western liberal order will be able to be spread to all corners of the world, and we will end the eschaton. The eschaton, of course, is a Christian view of when Christ rules earth for a 1,000-year reign. Immanentizing the eschaton is what the free traders thought they were going to get. In fact, I remember growing up, I was in 6th grade, at MacArthur Middle School, right there on Palatine Road, right where I grew up. And I remember we would watch, they had these morning news bits. I forgot the name of it. Maybe Blake would know. It was like 5 to 10 minutes long. It was like mandatory must runs. And I remember one of them. I'll think of it. I bet I could find it in a break. Anyway, it was the news clips. In one of them, they said, can you find a single thing when you're walking through a parking lot at Walmart and ask people what they bought that was made in America? And the answer was no. And of course, all my 6th grade classmates were like, that's wrong, that's wrong. And I remember the teacher would interject, and I wouldn't even say the teacher was liberal, the teacher was neoliberal. And the teacher would interject and say, no, this is a good thing.
I don't know if you remember during your younger years, any toy that I had as a child, you look on the bottom of the foot, on the back of the toy, whatever it was, the game console, you'll always see the stamp made in China. In fact, you still see that with household items. You can look around, pick something up, and you'll see that it is in fact made in China. I'm trying to look for something right now. I know there was a calculator around here somewhere. I'm looking at, I can't find the calculator. It was just here a moment ago. But anyway, you can find something and you can see that it says made in China. Let's take a look at this mouse. Let's see if it has any sort of indication that it is made from China. Obviously, it probably is, and it probably has a marking somewhere. This is an old mouse. Yeah, I'm not sure if it has anything there, but despite the point, pick something up, take a look around the item, and see if it says made in China. Whether the outside shell is not necessarily mentioned with regards to made in China, you'll find that the components inside the remote control or the TV or a sound speaker, soundboard, those parts are manufactured in China. Now, we want to, as America, remove ourselves from the manufacturing that happens in China, and we want to start manufacturing chips and all these types of things. And this is what the executive order that Trump signed was to start infrastructure with building chips in, I forget what state it is. They want to build facilities to be able to start that process. Companies have already started to invest in America, billions upon even trillions of dollars, in order to obviously see America thrive, because they have, and they know that if they put their money into America, they know that they'll get a return on that money. Most certainly. America's economy goes great. The rest of the world will follow in receiving the money that they want, the money that they have poured into. It's funny, I wanted to show you a video of a guy talking about income. I'll get back to the Charlie Kirk clip here in a moment, but he was talking about income and versus the income in, I think, 1970, 1980, whatever it was, versus the income now. We look at the income and the housing prices and how much they've increased. And I can't find that clip exactly, but basically what he goes on to say is how much income has really diminished when we see the prices of houses go up substantially, where we can't even afford the houses anymore. So back then, say a house cost $80,000. That was the general median house price. Then we look at the general median income of that time. It was $40,000, house worth $80,000. They were able to comfortably afford the house, no problem. Now these days we cannot afford the house prices at all. Go figure, right?
This made us wealthier. We don't have to do that work. We are liberated. In fact, what I was told growing up is that free trade would then make it where the Russians will be wearing Levi jeans, eating McDonald's, taking selfies, well, at the time, just listening to iPods. And it's not even that it's a bad thing for other things to be made in other countries.
I wanted to address the comment, which is kind of funny. James Irwin says, just visit the MAGA shop. It's all China or Bangladesh. And then Peace Pack says, James, I literally have a Trump hat right here, and the tag says Made in America. Of course, I think it would be funny if it did say Made in China. That would be absolutely hilarious. But not only that, it would be made all over the news. But I think that's just funny. Of course, you got to fact check it.
Of course not. We want a competition. We want markets. We do not want no trade. Instead,
Roxana, you can also vouch saying Made in the USA. She's got 2 items that she checked. On the backside table, bedside table says Made in the US. For some of the household items she got. Look, some things, yeah, you might find Made in the US, but look at the innards of that thing. If it's a component like a motherboard, a soundboard, computer, your phone, the inside of your phones, actually the iPhones, some of the inside of the iPhones contain Israeli manufacturing. But again, like Charlie says here, he's going to go on about it. It's not necessarily the fact that countries making things for America is not necessarily a bad thing. He's going to go on about that right now.
Nothing is made in America.
Yes,
Or
I'm
next
also
to nothing,
American.
When it's such a small percentage. When making something in America, almost people look differently at you. Why would you do that? Now, we also...
So if you've purchased a faulty car in California and want a huge check like I've got
No,
here...
I don't want a huge check. Of course not. Come on.
Fair. We have to be fair in our analysis. Partially, but not mainly, partially as to why the corporate class decided to move these jobs overseas is that unions got very greedy in the 1970s and 1980s. This is a lesser appreciated component of this analysis, is unions thought that they were too big for their bridges. They were like, what are you going to leave? Literally some of the labor unions would look at the corporate class and say, we want a 40% increase in wages, we want more days off. And the corporate class decided to get back at the unions. America became less competitive. Now, again, a lot of the Trump coalition is union labor. However, as Blake astutely pointed out, find one part of the American economy that is mass unionized that isn't totally awful. It's really hard to find. In the fact where mass unionization, especially public sector unionization, public sector teacher unions, public sector janitorial unions, public sector government unions, I think that there's a place, for example, a carpenters union. They're very good at training. They're very good at apprenticeship. However, there needs to be a balance between capital and labor. And what happened, of course, is the capital, the corporate class, having no allegiance to the United States of America, and the fact that unions overreached and unions got cocky, they looked at the corporate class in the eye and said, we're American labor. What, are you going to really go and make that trinket in China? And the McKinsey type said, yep, that's exactly what we're going to do, actually. And it was made easier by this decision. Understand what President Donald Trump is doing is fixing and remedying the mistakes of past. If you had to go look at what is the original sin as to why we are in the place that we are in, there are many places. There are many decisions. But the one where we actually have it on tape, rarely do you have the original sin on tape. And it was televised on C-SPAN. And that is when we decided to make what was then a third world and maybe a second world country to have entrance into the World Trade Organization.
He's going to play a really interesting clip here from Bill Clinton. As I mentioned before, Bill Clinton, along with other presidents like FDR, mind you, they have also contributed to this. George Bush, they pursued these types of policies leaning towards a tariff-free economy. Let's watch this clip. You'll get to it in a moment.
This was a glide path. We did not do this to
As he
try
mentions,
and
the original
make us
sin.
have greater harmony with China. In fact, you could make an argument that our relations with China were probably better before China went into the World Trade Organization. The free trade zealots told us that trade will bring us peace. In fact, it turns out that mass trade with China brought us closer and closer to conflict. President Donald Trump is fixing this problem from Bill Clinton. Play cut 121.
The WTO agreement will move China in the right direction. It will advance the goals America has worked for in China for the past 3 decades. And of course, it will advance our own economic interests. Economically, this agreement is the equivalent of a one-way street. It requires China to open its markets with 1/5 of the world's population, potentially the biggest markets in the world, to both our products and services in unprecedented new ways. All we do is to agree to maintain the present access which China enjoys. Chinese tariffs from telecommunications products to automobiles to agriculture will fall by half or more over just 5 years. For the first time, our companies will be able to sell and distribute products in China made by workers here in America without being forced to relocate manufacturing to China, sell through the Chinese government, or transfer valuable technology. For the first time, we'll be able to export products without exporting jobs.
Yeah, that actually didn't end up happening. Now, I wanted to address some of the comments back on YouTube. It says, save, it sucks, but stop buying stupid things. Save for a house, I did it. Victim mentality. On my regard, of course, saving for a house. Didn't say I'm not saving for a house. But you have to remember, I mean, if we can save up to, I don't know, 200,000, 300,000, 400,000. I mean, we're talking about California homes here. I live in California. Homes are nearly $1 million, especially in the neighborhood that I currently live in. I'm going to be able to save for that. Down payment, maybe. But even then, mortgages, $6,000, $7,000. In order to qualify for the mortgage, you need to make a substantial amount of income. I personally don't make that much income. I don't have the qualifications for that. Now, I am striving to work more, work harder, to be able to get to that point, of course. I don't want to be stuck as a renter forever. It is not something we want to do. This is not something that I think any of you want. I think we all want to own homes. But what Trump and his administration is trying to do is to make things more obtainable. And so it's, again, the delayed gratification. Let's address some of these more comments here. It says, one of the comments that says, would Moses or Jesus be okay with what Israel's doing? Let's talk about what Israel's doing right now. What is exactly is the thing that you're mentioning with what Israel's doing? There's so much that is happening with Israel. Israel is the center of attention there in the Middle East. Of course, I think when Israel makes a move, the whole world pays attention to that, because not only is it Israel, it's really deals with the fact that it is God's time clock. So I think there's so much that is happening. There's so much to talk about with Israel. We can go on about what's going on with them trying to, or them going deeper into the Gaza Strip. They are actively seeking to remove Hamas from their place and regain control of the Gaza Strip. Hamas is a bunch of rats that are in holes. They pop out when they want food. I'm not talking about food. I'm talking about, Anyway, before YouTube bans this conversation, let's go back to the comments. It says, were you made in America? Yes, I was. If Kamala would have won, it would have been the end of what America truly stands for. Yeah, you feel bad that I live in Cali. Yeah, it's expensive out here. I mean, considering moving, but the fight is here. Why move when the fight's here? I mean, we also have great food out here. I mean, I'm sure there's great food elsewhere, but I've been in other countries It's not really good, solid, mom and pop shops. I agree. Cali sucks for housing. Yeah, you really can't find housing out here. I mean, go to Texas, go to Arizona, go to Washington. Of course, income does decrease wherever you go. But I think with the job that I currently have, I think I'd be able to actually obtain or sustain my income, my current income. I don't think that would change much. Yes, agreed. But sadly, that brighter future is now out of reach. I'm not sure what you're referencing to when you're mentioning Peace Pack. Oh, well, referencing to if Kamala would have won. I mean, I think it would have been really probably the end of the world. Maybe I'm exaggerating, but we see here it says, Lucas, you say it's a complex problem. There's no single solution. Yeah, it really is. All this stuff, tariffs, everything. America and its economy, it's so complex. We cannot put our finger on the thing that say this will solve the problems, but we do know that somebody will eventually come onto the stage and say, I have the solution for all of the problems of the entire world. This single person will have the answers to everything. And this is the person that will be known as the Antichrist during the last days. So we're all heading into the end of, I mean, where does this leave us? What does the U.S. and China have to do with Bible prophecy that I mentioned just now? It says, well, they're not mentioned at all. Neither of these two nations are mentioned or seem to be involved within the scriptures, both Old and New Testament. Are we moving towards a world where the U.S. and China do not exist? It is very possible that we go into these trade wars and these wars begin to escalate. As I mentioned, the news story that broke loose about China talking about the fact that they openly admitted in a private meeting, they admitted, which to the Biden administration's surprise, they then notified the incoming president, President Trump. They said, and in his administration, of course, they said, look, this is what the Chinese Communist Party just admitted to us in a private meeting. They were behind these cyber attacks. And now Trump, knowing this beforehand, has this and utilizes this information as leverage, of course, against China and these tariffs. Of course, all this stuff ties in together. You say, this is called the Messiah syndrome, the one who can solve it all. No, I'm actually talking about the Antichrist who says he can solve it all. The Messiah who is coming, he deals with the judgment and all that stuff. We can get into that if you'd like. It's so sad what's happening in our relationship with our allies, other countries. Well, look, in some ways, a lot of these countries, we are allies. I think more or less they're allies with Trump as opposed to allies with the Biden administration. Biden did absolutely nothing, met with maybe 7 leaders over a year's worth of, a couple of years, I think 2 years it was that he'd only met with 7 leaders. Trump had already met with many leaders in the first, 30 days, 2 months. So what do we leave here? What do we leave off here with this whole Antichrist thing? I'm curious your thoughts. Yeah, you mentioned here, Peace Pack. Emma, we are tired of being a stepping stone for every other country. It's time to focus on us. Look, I couldn't agree with you more. We need to focus on our own country. We need to focus on building and really creating an economy for the Americans to thrive on. It was good for a certain period of time, as Charlie Kirk mentioned, is good for a little bit of a time. Now, tariffs didn't necessarily cause the Great Depression, or the 2008 recession, but they most certainly affected, of course, so they, you know. But during I think it was World War II or the Cold War, I forget whichever it was, they implemented tariff-free trade in order to bolster the European economy. But now the European nation was flipping America off and saying, well, thank you for all that you did, but screw you. And now they're coming to the table and they're saying, hey, look. We want to make a deal. We want to make a deal. And like I said, the EU offers Trump 0 for 0 tariffs. Yeah. They really got freaked out. They really did. And we are continuing to see more nations come to the table. Now, again, there's no sort of deals yet. So Trump had implemented the universal 10% tariff back. And so let's see if I can find this video for you. Here it is. This is the one I want. I'm just going to play the audio. You can listen to it. You know what? I'm not even sure if you guys can hear that or not. So I'm going to go ahead and put that into a browser where you guys can hear it. Maybe even see it. Let's see what we could do here. All right. This should work.
$80,000 house. Very simple. Over 30 years, just a trifle.
Oh boy.
Down payment and a pittance of a mortgage and 2 living parents with a pen. Who can sign?
So that clip was from Boy Meets World, and that episode aired in 1999, and I couldn't help myself, so I had to run the numbers. The show took place in Philly, and I saw that the median house price was around $80,000 in 1999. Now, Corey and Topanga were high school students without a job, so they couldn't qualify, but what about the median household income back then? It's $40,000, which is about $3,300 a month, and a 3% down payment on the median house was only $2,400. So somebody in Philly in 1999 didn't even have to save 1 month's income to put a down payment on this house, and the interest rates were around 7%, just like they are today. So with principal, interest, property taxes, insurance, and private mortgage insurance, the total payment was $750 a month to get the median house in Philly, and you're making $3,300, so that's about what, 25%? So a family making 40 grand could take care of their entire mortgage in just 1 week. And then I wanted to see, well, let's just see what happened to the prices in Philadelphia, because we know the averages around the country, but let's look at Philly. $80,000 was the median price in 1999. It's now $250,000, so below the average for the nation, but the income was $40,000 for the median household. Now it's $60,000. So the housing price, even in Philly, went up over 200% in the last 25 years, but the income only went up 53%. So even in smaller cities, metro cities, no matter where we look, I don't think I have found a city in America where the housing and income was even close to keeping up.
Isn't that wild? Isn't that wild? I mean, you guys, are you guys facing this type of hardship? Maybe you guys are well off and good jobs. I mean, great for you. But that's wild. Taking a look back at the comments here, it says, by the way, I like your transitions. Thanks. Appreciate it. Spent some time trying to get this whole ordeal looking professional. I want it to be good for you guys. I want you guys to be entertained. I want you guys to love what's going on here, because we're ultimately trying to give you the news in a professional manner, even though, I have some skills. I don't know. We don't have to defend or pay for the rest of the world because they can't get their act together. We're actually the one that ponies up to defend or help these countries defend against, enemies. You say, if it wasn't for France, America wouldn't have got independence from Britain, so that scorecard is settled. You think you didn't have tariffs before Trump. You think the U.S. doesn't subside agriculture. You know, the whole conversation about the Americans coming over to, or rather, these groups of settlers that came from Britain to settle in the America. There was two, obviously but their mission, they had a mission, right? And this is the mission of the Plymouth settlement. We only know about mostly Jamestown, but the Plymouth settlement was actually, their mission was to, and they write it in the, what is the document? Someone reminded me of the document. What is the document? It starts with an M, not the Magna Carta. Oh boy, it's slipping my mind. Mayflower Compact. The Mayflower Mayflower Compact, they mention that the purpose of them going and settling in this country is to spread the gospel of Jesus Christ. There's a whole wonderful history about this, the settlement of Plymouth. You just have to learn the history to understand it and see exactly the intent and the purpose of America was. But God blessed America so much so that we became a nation that is literally the strongest nation in the world. Why? Go figure. It is the fact that God had blessed America in tremendous ways, because the Americans, the ones who were going to settle in to bring about the gospel of Jesus Christ, he began to bless the United States. You mentioned thoughts on Bitcoin. Bitcoin is, I think, going to take off. Now, I know Trump has significantly, he did sign an executive order so they can really work with, boosting the crypto economy. The great thing about crypto is that it's not, backed by a bank, but it's backed by these systems, these mining, what would you call them? Computers that mine the Bitcoin through blockchains and through these, a lot of these things are slipping my mind. Bitcoin is going to be a part of this economy to help it grow and to be implemented more within currency, within the everyday currency of, you wouldn't say United States dollar, because it is going to become a sort of way to trade. It is actually the I wouldn't say realist, that's not the word I'm looking for, but when we talk about meme coins don't have value like Bitcoin does. Right? Bitcoin is legitimate through the processes of mining the coins. It's such an interesting topic to talk about Bitcoins, but I think Bitcoins will, again, I'm not giving sort of financial advice, what you should invest in, what you shouldn't invest in. Look at your portfolios. If you have portfolios, just look at what you have and really just analyze the things that are aligning with your beliefs. I'm not saying beliefs religiously. Yeah, sure, they can be aligning with that, of course. But I think there has to be some grounding in that, foundation in that. Jamestown is the OG colony. Yes, they did come before Plymouth, right? Jamestown did arrive. Plymouth arrived, I think, a year later. But Jamestown, actually, when we look at these two settlements, the two settlements of Jamestown and Plymouth, Jamestown they wanted to work with the tribes that were there in America. And the Indian tribes, they got fed up because Jamestown said, you know what? You're going to supply all of our needs. Then it came to the point where the winter came and Jamestown could not survive on their own because the Indians, They said, hey, look, no, we need to supply food for our own, food and supplies for our own people. And so Jamestown actually decreased in number significantly. However, Plymouth did the right thing. They said, hey, if you're going to live among us, you are also going to contribute to our economy. And they grew in number. Now, when you look at the two compared side by side, you look at the other colonies that started to branch off, we see that Plymouth was doing things according to the gospel. Now, they had some, shortcomings. But it's really interesting. You look back at the history. Here we go. You say, reply to Anthony, as long as we ignore the flat 10%, this is sticking around. That flat 10 is a starting point for negotiation subject to change, period. But doing that forces countries to collaborate for an agreed to solution. Yeah, of course, they want to come to an agreement with these tariffs. They don't want to face Trump and his administration and the ideas that will come as a result of not coming to a negotiation within these 90 days. I do think that they want to make a deal as soon as possible. And so Trump, again, having the leverage, is going to utilize that to bring in the best possible deals for America, which he already had a bunch of deals with countries, and Saudi Arabia offering, I think, trillions to America already. I don't think it's billions. I actually think it's trillions, 6 to 7 trillion that they had offered to invest in America. Other companies are beginning to manufacture in America already, or begin the process, like building plants, building more buildings, houses. All these companies are investing in this, right? Toyota already started doing this a long time ago. They stopped manufacturing in China. Now they still manufacture. They stopped manufacturing the most of their cars that they want to sell in the U.S. They started selling them in the U.S. because they built their facilities here in America. I mean, you can see Toyota is huge in America. Insanely huge. But they did the right thing, because during Trump's 2016 term, he had implemented the same thing. But now we're seeing that Trump is trying to fix the economy by implementing these tariffs, because, again, like some of the comments are saying here on YouTube, they're saying, look, these tariffs are important because they're to bring the U.S. economy back to where it needs to be because of the trade deficits that we have, and with China and some of these other countries. You say, so imposing a tariff on a country that is poorer than us, that doesn't have tariffs on our goods, is going to open negotiations. See, they're not being fair to us. They're not buying from us. These economies can thrive by supplying or buying these types of things from us and coming to the table for negotiations. Vietnam, Taiwan, most certainly. It'll benefit their economy. It'll benefit our economy. We'll all win. It's a win-win situation. Of course, America is being put first. So I think that is important. Trillions of investments in Melania coin. Is that a coin? Or is it a meme coin? Are you so weak that we need tariffs? Are we so weak that we need tariffs to negotiate? Are we the wealthiest country in the world? We are the strongest country in the world. We have all the leverage. Most certainly. Wealthiest country? I don't know. I don't know about that one. I have to think about that one. If we're the strongest country, would that make us the wealthiest country? But here's the problem. The Biden administration would just get the instant gratification, as I was talking about earlier. They would print money, print money, print money, and print money. And eventually we start to begin to lose value on the currency that we have. That puts us in a very bad position. And of course, allowing free trade with all these other nations, it's not benefiting us. We're just consuming. Although we are the biggest consumer in the entire world, I mean, we look at China's economy. China's economy will collapse under these insane tariffs. The U.S. economy will do just fine. China's economy, not so much. Their markets are plummeting. And they continue to retaliate because they're trying to hold their cards together. We absolutely need more leverage. We need all the leverage that we can take. This is all very intricate in this whole tariff game here. So we are using that leverage, Goober. You want us to become poor. It seems like that's what you want. I mean, I'm not sure what he's advocating there. It's possible that he's trying to really think these things through. TA, Clockwork Night. Think these things through. Tariffs are going to be a good thing in the long term to bolster the American economy, to keep us on top, so that we are the ones that can, like Biden's administration, they wanted to help everybody else, but we had no sort of, we couldn't even help ourselves. And so we're sending money to Ukraine, we're sending money elsewhere, and we're saying, here you go, take our money. This gave us, nothing in return. It's very hot where I live. Got the window open, motorcycles blaring at 12 a.m. Must be going to work. Look, hardworking Americans out there going straight to work, 12 a.m. Late shift. That's the time right now. Guys, thank you so much for being here. Look, we're going to be just going and covering all of this stuff. If you really liked what you heard, if you liked the conversations that we were having, please consider subscribing. We're going to be posting all this on the social media platforms, podcast, wherever you can get your podcasts. We really want to see America grow and become an economy that is thriving. I mean, most certainly I want to own a house. I want to have my family to be able to live in a house comfortably, reasonably, affording a mortgage. I mean, I would love to afford my mortgage with just 1 week's worth of pay. Most certainly Trump wants to increase our income substantially so that we can match the prices that we are seeing with housing. So I think once we delay this gratification just for a little while, at the end of the year, let's see where we're at. If we're in a bad spot, if we're in a worse spot, you can go on the live, join the live stream. You tell me I told you so. You were wrong. You were wrong. Charles, you said we'd be better off. Look at where we are. But personally, with everything that we're seeing, looks like things are going in the right direction. I talk about the trade war that could become and escalate to something worse. I hope and pray that is not the case. But we must continue to press on and press through and understand that there's a greater purpose that God has for us on this earth. Each one of us has a role to play in this sort of system here of the economy in our city, in our country, in our state, whatever that is. Ask God for the clear and specific calling to know what you are supposed to do with regards to everything. And you go and tackle that head on with God straight on your mind. So thanks, guys, so much for being here. I really appreciate you guys for clocking in with me. I'm just a regular American, again, just like you. If you're from outside of the country, hey, look, you're getting an inside peek into what we're going through, what we're talking about here. If you guys want, feel free to subscribe. Again, like this video, share it with your friends. I want to grow the social medias, Instagram, TikTok, all that stuff. Feel free. And let's keep the conversation open. We will most certainly be back either today, well, today's 12 a.m., Saturday. Might be back later at night. We'll see. Or Sunday night. We'll see how that goes. Keep it locked here, guys. I'll see you guys in the next one.